1984 was a year hallmarked by many striking images. Death brought new leaders to prominence. The struggle for freedom was remembered and went on. Peaceful protest contrasted with armed struggle. Superpower confrontation and social upheaval, but there were times of humor. Great and extraordinary technological achievements, and moments of happiness. It was a year of memories which have been preserved here in this series for all time. The election bandwagon rolled around the United States throughout 1984.
I'm gonna do it just one more time. You ain't seen nothing yet.
It stopped in November with Ronald Reagan's re-election to a second term of office. The Democrats' candidate, Walter Mondale, was magnanimous in defeat.
By all the people of this country that have permitted me to wage this fight, what an honor it is. And I'm at peace with the knowledge that I gave it everything I've got.
The Republicans won a landslide victory, gaining 49 of the 50 states and reaffirming Americans' belief in Reagan's policies so far. The president's welcoming era was less enthusiastic. Anti-Reagan protesters demonstrated outside the Irish Parliament. Inside, Reagan addressed the Senate, emphasizing his commitment to peace.
We must not and will not interfere in Irish matters nor prescribe to you solutions or formulas. But I want you to know that we pledge to you our goodwill and support, and we're with you as you work toward peace.
The president went to London for an economic summit, assured of a warm welcome from an old ally.
What you did to get this special treatment from those people outside. Are you mixed United States and is that nearly enough? Sorry, have you got a boom microphone up there? How really terrible. This is the electronic media, is it?
Yes, sorry, Mum.
Yes, all right. Now, we had very satisfactory talks, and we're now all around a family supper, and we're getting very hungry. And there's another wave of you to come up yet.
Meanwhile, Nancy Reagan was lunching elsewhere.
I was just reminded when we were in Sacramento, we had a baby elephant sent us.
That's her way of...
We like each other. And we gave it to the zoo, but I named it Doc.
America's First Lady spent a day at London Zoo, where she charmed both the animals and the Bermondsey children who lunched with her. The miners' strike dominated British headlines throughout 1984. NUM President Arthur Scargill warned of national pit closures and job losses, whilst Coal Board Chairman Ian McGregor maintained that the industry required drastic cutbacks to survive. Nottinghamshire miners resisted the calling of a strike without a national ballot, and violence followed. Despite the stalemate, a strike went ahead. But even the weather seemed against the miners when the advent of an early summer meant that coal stocks lasted. Scargill warned,
I can tell you that the CEGB, in conjunction with the government, are preparing for presentation to Parliament emergency measures for power cuts on a rota basis as they go into August and September.
But the threatened cuts never materialized. However, the violence which split the picket lines irreparably divided communities.
He's kicking me! Look at him, he's kicking me! I'm kicking him in the mouth! You can check!
The full-scale police presence did little to quell the confrontations.
is an attempt to substitute the rule of the mob for the rule of law.
Ian McGregor was insistent that talks centred around cutting output and job losses through natural wastage. Arthur Scargill would only discuss the industry's future on the basis of no further cuts in either area. The two sides continued to differ, as did Labour leader Neil Kinnock, who condemned picket line violence.
I condemn violence. I abominate violence. I damn violence. All violence. All violence without fear or favour. That's what makes me different from Margaret Thatcher. I don't have her double standards.
High Court action by working miners eventually led to the seizure of NUM assets, but the strike dragged on for 10 months. Tension between Britain and Libya reached new heights with the murder of policewoman Yvonne Fletcher in St James's Square. Anti-Gaddafi demonstrators outside the Libyan People's Bureau were fired on from the building. WPC Fletcher was fatally wounded in the chest. "17 protesters were injured in the incident. Police marksmen surrounded the area as the 10-day siege began, powerless to storm the building as the Libyans were protected by diplomatic immunity. Yvonne Fletcher's killers were finally led from the building and taken to the airport and freedom. The Libyan diplomats boarded a flight back to Tripoli and a hero's welcome from Colonel Gaddafi. The government severed diplomatic relations with Libya, and defiant Britons returned to London. WPC Fletcher was buried with full police honours. The Archbishop of Canterbury's envoy, Terry Waite, arrived in Tripoli to give hope to 4 Britons still held there. Michael Berdiner, Robin Plummer, Malcolm Anderson and Alan Russell had been political detainees since the London siege. Christmas came early for the Britons, as Mr. Waite distributed cards and presents from home, but there was little sign that Gaddafi's regime would release them.
Deliver us from evil, for thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
On the 12th of October, IRA terrorists struck at the heart of the government. An explosion ripped through 5 floors of the Grand Hotel in Brighton, where prominent Tories were staying during the party conference. The blast killed 5 people and injured 31 others. Conference organizer Harvey Thomas was pulled out alive after being trapped for more than an hour.
Listen, Harvey, just one question before you go. Was there anyone with you in that room?
No, nobody at all.
Nobody at all in that room?
Trade Secretary Norman Tebbit and his wife were buried for 4 hours under the wreckage. Margaret Tebbit was severely disabled. Mrs. Thatcher had been evacuated to a nearby police station and was defiant.
Conference will go on as usual.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you.
The next morning, she emphasized her pledge.
The fact that we are gathered here now, shocked but composed and determined, is a sign not only that this attack has failed, but that all attempts to destroy democracy by terrorism will fail.
Europe saw its fair share of protests in 1984. French President Mitterrand's austere reform program met large-scale opposition, from those protesting at the proposed nationalization of church schools to steelmen on strike against closures. In West Germany, metal workers went on strike over demands for a 35-hour week. Car production was affected at Mercedes in Stuttgart, where 13,000 men were on strike, although many still crossed the picket lines. World leaders attended the state funeral of Yuri Andropov in Moscow. Mr. Andropov's term as president was the shortest in Russian history, serving only 15 months before his death. Konstantin Chernenko succeeded Andropov, and the old guard were very much in evidence at the funeral and at the military parade in Red Square to mark the anniversary of the October Revolution. Peace protesters at Greenham Common in Britain maintained their pledge to get rid of cruise missiles using whatever tactics necessary. And CND campaigners took their protest to the streets during President Reagan's visit to London. The face of the future appeared later in the year as Mikhail Gorbachev led a Soviet mission to Britain. Unusually, he appeared with his wife, Raisa. Anglo-Soviet relations entered a new phase, when the talks ended with genuine agreement in seeking arms reductions. But the same could not be said for Iran and Iraq. The Gulf War entered its fourth year, with untold numbers of prisoners held by both sides. Frontline soldiers faced each other from archaic trenches more reminiscent of World War I. Muslim fundamentalists led by the Ayatollah Khomeini saw Iraqi President Saddam Hussein as a religious traitor. Birthday celebrations in Iraq to mark the president's 47th birthday did little to dispel this belief. Israeli troops were still in South Lebanon. Israel would not leave until Syria withdrew her forces from northern Lebanon, under the terms of a 1983 agreement. The US Embassy in Beirut came under attack again when a massive car bomb exploded, killing 40 people. In Amman, Yasser Arafat tried to consolidate his position as PLO leader. In India, religious tension at the Sikhs' holiest shrine, the Golden Temple in Amritsar, had tragic consequences. Heavily armed Sikh militants occupied the holy shrine, demanding their own homeland called Khalistan. They were led by Jamail Singh Bhindranwale, the exponent of Sikh extremism. Mrs. Gandhi was forced to take action. Operation Blue Star ended the 4-day siege, but at great cost. Troops stormed the temple and were met by ferocious opposition. More than 800 people died. It proved to be the death knell for Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. On the 31st of October, the Indian leader was assassinated in her garden by Sikh members of her bodyguards, bitterly resentful of the action taken at Amritsar. Heads of state from throughout the world joined hundreds of thousands of mourners to follow the cortege to the cremation ground. The sun plays an important role in a Hindu funeral, and Rajiv Gandhi was the first to light the funeral pyre. But Rajiv had little time to mourn. He succeeded Mrs. Gandhi and had to deal with a backlash of sectarian violence. South Africa also had a new head of state. Former Prime Minister P.W. Botha became the first executive state president under a new constitution which set up 3 separate parliamentary houses for whites, Asians and coloureds. The coloureds were the first to vote under the new system, followed by the Asians. The constitution was designed to diffuse racial tension, but black South Africans were still excluded. Disillusionment spread through the black townships, and a political campaign against the reforms was led by a coalition group, the UDF. International condemnation increased over the new constitution's fundamentally racist character. However, Botha's government did score diplomatic points in neighbouring countries. A non-aggression pact with Angola was followed by a peace agreement with Mozambique, outlawing cross-border raids. South African troops deployed in Angola to combat SWAPO guerrillas were withdrawn in an attempt to establish a ceasefire in southern Africa. Man walked freely in space for the first time.
Makes about 1 rotation every 11 or 12 seconds.
Crew members from the shuttle Challenger, Bruce McCandless and Robert Stewart, use gas-powered jetpacks to float away from the craft, 170 miles above the Earth.
I'd like to say hello to Brilliant McCandless and Bob Stewart for sending us this spectacular television coverage of man's historic walk in space. Let me ask you, what's it like to work out there unattached to the shuttle and maneuvering freely in space?
The view is simply spectacular and panoramic. We're literally opening a new frontier in what man can do in space.
Figures, everything looks real good on board.
Discovery Houston, it looks good to us also, Steve. Your go for the deploy.
3 satellites were also launched, but Challenger's crew managed some relaxation, and Judy Resnick, America's second woman in space, sent a message home.
Discovery Houston, good news, Steve.
The Russians too established a first in space. Squadron leader Rakesh Sharma joined the crew of Soyuz T-11 to become the first Indian cosmonaut. Sharma carried out a photographic survey of India's territory before Soyuz T-11 docked with Soyuz T-10. He also enjoyed the first takeaway curried space dinner. Virgin Atlantic launched its maiden flight to New York. At a cost of £99 one way, 25,000 tickets were pre-sold. Virgin chief Richard Branson wasn't prepared for the occasion.
You can't have my passport. I've forgotten it. Right, we'll have to do something about that.
The royal barge brought the Queen to open the Thames flood barrier, a remarkable feat of modern engineering which was designed to protect 45 square miles of London from the threat of flooding during exceptionally high tides.
It is important to remember that for many a year, no one thought it would be possible to stem the tidal flood of the Thames. Yet, thanks to a combination of foresight and tenacity, the power of the great river flowing through our capital has been tamed.
At the touch of a button, the steel gates rotated beneath the Thames for the first time and were hydraulically lifted to a height of 50 feet. '84 had its share of eccentric innovations. Australian musician Paul Gren spent considerable time and money converting his Volkswagen Beetle into an amphibious vehicle. The object of the exercise was a planned drive across the sea from Australia to Tasmania. The more familiar sight at sea was sailor Che Blythe. New York gave a traditional send-off as the trimaran Beefeater II started out on her attempt to break a record set 133 years before. Jay Blythe and his crew were aiming to race the Clippers from New York to San Francisco via Cape Horn. An unfamiliar sight as a British athlete was Zola Budd, and not in bare feet. The acquisition of a British passport enabled her to compete for a place in the British Olympic team. The South African-born runner won this 1500 meters in 9 minutes 2.6 seconds, well inside the Olympic qualifying time. The world's press were ever present. This time their first question was, what was the fastest time that Zola could run the event?
It just depends on how fast I can run.
Controversy still surrounded her British citizenship.
We was under a lot of pressure down in South Africa as well. We are quite used to pressure.
Andrew Lloyd Webber unveiled his most eagerly awaited musical since Cats, and expectations were running high. What had given him the idea?
Why trains? I ask myself this every day. Trains are magic, aren't they? I mean, I believe in trains. And I think when I see my kids, and when I think back to the first time that my son Nicholas saw an American steam train, I thought, well, something about trains.
Starlight Express cost £2 million to stage, and all of the cast, including singer Stephanie Lawrence, appeared on roller skates. The idea had suggested itself to director Trevor Nunn whilst in New York, directing the American production of Cats. The royal party arrived by more conventional transportation for the musical's premiere. Crowds waited outside a church on Sydney Harbour for the wedding of one of rock's most eligible bachelors. Elton John wore white, his outfit marginally understated for the occasion. The 80 guests included comedian Barry Humphries and TV interviewers Michael and Mary Parkinson. Elton's bride, Renata Blauel, also wore white. But why get married at the grand old age of 37?
Well, I'd never found the right person to marry before, and now I have. And it was just a question of circumstances, which unfortunately looked like at one time that we wouldn't be able to. But everyone in this country has been so understanding and so great. And it's great to be married here, actually.
Oxford University's Dangerous Sports Club brought their own brand of action onto the piste in Switzerland, and any type of vehicle was permissible. Other dangerous slides took place at London's Tower Bridge, this time for charity. Policeman Bob Reynolds joined a team of Marines to abseil from the top of the bridge to the riverbank below. The aim was to raise money for Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital. Martin Laser and his much-travelled elephant jumped off a bridge in West Virginia, just for fun.
That's him, that's him, that's him. I bet you.
While stuntman Doug Senekal jumped over a two-story house into a lake to break a record. But fortunately not himself. Paul McCartney arrived back from Barbados, where he was fined for possession of cannabis. A similar fate awaited his wife Linda in London.
Just yesterday I was just caught with a small quantity of cannabis, for which I was fined 200 Barbados dollars. I don't hold any grudges. It didn't really spoil my holiday. I don't believe it's a terribly harmful thing to do, but I don't actually, if left to my own devices, I will prefer not say anything about it. I'm telling you, this substance, cannabis, is a whole lot less harmful than rum punch, whiskey, nicotine, and glue, all of which are perfectly legal.
What about your children? What about your children,
I would
Paul?
like to see it decriminalised, because I don't think, in the privacy of my own room, I was doing anyone any harm whatsoever.
Later in the year, McCartney returned home to Liverpool. Linda McCartney looked on as Paul was given the freedom of the city by the council's chairman. The ex-Beatle chose Liverpool for the British premiere of his new film, Give My Regards to Broad Street. Bob Hope also went back to his roots in Wales, visiting his parents' former house in Greenwood Street, Barry.
This is a wonderful day for me. Of all the wonderful days I've been lucky enough to have, this is one of the best for me.
He was welcomed by Nancy Davis, who now lived there.
Very, very steep. Yes, very
There's no light either.
Fasten myself to go.
Armed with a souvenir, Bob Hope reminisced about his parents.
My mother, I don't think I would have inherited the voice I had, which started me in show business. And I sing pretty good today, regardless of what Crosby said.
He went on to prove it at his sellout concert in Cardiff. Other memories flooded back when Mrs. Thatcher opened Churchill's wartime bunker. Winston's great-grandson was amongst the Churchill family and ministers who attended the ceremony.
Because these Spartan quarters speak across the decades to our hearts and to our memories. And they're special because without the total dedication of the people, known and unknown, who worked here, freedom itself would have died.
Rock memorabilia went on auction in London. Under the hammer were items for Beatles collectors. A bubblegum machine with a signed photo of the Fab Four.
260 at the front then. Well done. 260. Your number? 397. Lot 14, Club Records. Showing on my left. £160 I'm bid. 160. Any more now? 160. Selling for 160. 170.
Among the most sought-after items were John Lennon's Hofner guitar, sold for £15,500, and a handwritten book of Lennon's poems valued at £12,000.
6,000. 6,200.
The gold disc for Magical Mystery Tour also came under the gavel.
200. Any more? 6,200 then.
The Beatles auction was followed by an even more diverse range of memorabilia, from Mark Bolan's peacock chair to one of Elton John's old pianos. The British royal family travelled the world in 1984. The Queen arrived in Amman on a state visit to Jordan. While at the Martyrs' Monument, one of her duties was to water the Tree of Life, the Arab equivalent of the eternal flame. Princess Anne visited the Gambia. In her capacity as president of the Save the Children Fund, she was taken to those areas worst affected by the drought which swept the country, and shown how aid was being used. Generosity abounded amongst the hunger. The gift of a goat to be ceremonially slaughtered for the princess's lunch was graciously passed over. Prince Charles received a more ceremonial welcome in Papua New Guinea. During his tour, the prince was initiated as paramount chief of the island of Manus. In a country of 700 languages, the tribal witch doctor conducted the ceremony in excellent English.
Call upon you to receive this camberwheel. Our ancestors used as a tool to smooth up a piece of wood.
Closer to home, Princess Diana arrived at Heathrow Airport to visit the Concorde workshop. There was a less slimline aircraft as a gift for Prince William, a leather jumbo jet. She broke with tradition with a kiss for Lord King, chairman of British Airways. The Queen Mother made a rare excursion from British shores as the royal launch took her through the maze of canals in Venice on an unofficial visit to the city. The press had its little joke when the Queen Mother graciously accepted a cornetto ice cream from a gondolier. Prince William also seemed unworried by the limelight as he made a second birthday appearance for the press. Richard Burton died in August. Actress Elizabeth Taylor, twice married to Burton, paid a private visit to his family in Wales after the funeral. The service had been held in Séligny, Switzerland, near to Burton's home. Autumn saw a happier occasion in London, as Prince Charles and Prince William arrived at St Mary's Hospital to see the newest member of the royal family. Prince Henry Charles Albert David, the third in line to the throne, made his debut within 24 hours of birth. June the 6th marked the 40th anniversary of the D-Day landings in Normandy. President Reagan and President Mitterrand attended a service at Pointe du Hoc, where a memorial was unveiled to the American Rangers who died capturing the beachhead in World War II. President Mitterrand then joined Queen Elizabeth at the British War Cemetery in Bayeux. Utah Beach had witnessed some of the fiercest fighting. 40 years later, the Queen and the French President walked quietly through the sand dunes to join other heads of state. Queen Elizabeth reviewed a parade of Allied troops before she, President Mitterrand, and President Reagan continued their progress of remembrance. "3,000 Canadian dead lay buried on a hillside near Benny-sur-Mer. Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau stood in silent tribute with the French and British representatives. And at Arromanches, British troops marched past in a final tribute. Those were some of the memories of the year 1984.